People bought into wanting a better lives for their families, wanting to live in a community of people where all things were shared, because they run every single part of your life: schooling, housing, clothing, finances. There's no part of your life that really belongs to you. Gloriavale is very Amish adjacent, and interestingly enough was founded by my grandfather. He had multiple counts of assault and charges against him. We didn't know this. We knew he'd spent time in jail, but the propaganda was he was persecuted for his faith and what he believed in. I grew up thinking that men were above me and that I had to submit my will to them, watching babies be black and blue, like babies, young people who were not fitting into Gloriavale, the rebellious. They would be taken into these meetings that were hours upon hours of psychological torture to these teenagers who are trying to find their way in the world. But I'm a kid growing up in this environment. I didn't even know what was quite wrong, because I'm taught that these things are right and good. And my critical thinking that started to kind of drop in. And I was like, I don't think this is right.
Mine is the only voice.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening and you would prefer to see our faces and support the show in the best way that you could, going over to YouTube is the best option, because anytime you interact with a post, it boosts the algorithm, sends it to more people who are not subscribers, and helps more people become aware and more compassionate of these people who are bravely coming on and sharing their stories with us today. Today's guest, I'm thrilled to finally have made this happen. We've been in contact for over a year. You guys, our audience, have been asking for this group for over a year, probably since we started, actually. And so I'm so excited to finally get into this topic with someone who has been in it, was born in it, and left. We're talking about Gloriavale today. So thank you so much for joining us, Lilia Tarawa.
Hi, how's it going?
It's going great. I'm just so excited. So Gloriavale, for people who aren't familiar, it's based in New Zealand. You're currently in New Zealand, and I'm going to let you give the background because I don't want to butcher anything. But it is a group that, from an outsider's perspective, having done so many interviews on this channel, it feels almost like Amish adjacent. I don't know if you would feel the same way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess we probably should dive into like what Gloriavale is and what it looks like, and give a little bit of my background. I'm also very excited to be on the podcast as well. I absolutely love your style, and I think the work that you're sharing here, letting people share their stories and providing a platform for that, is so important. So super happy and excited to be here as well.
Great.
But you're right, Gloriavale is very Amish adjacent. And interestingly enough, so Gloriavale was founded by my grandfather, who was an evangelical Christian preacher over in Australia. And he used to go around out to a lot of like campaigning into the outback to like evangelize the word of God, basically. And he got invited over to a church in New Zealand, which is why he ended up coming over here. And eventually that church, he took over that church. It separated with the church he had been invited to because there were differences in opinion. And then ultimately he moved everyone over to the West Coast, which is very, very isolated. Like the West Coast is like the Wop Wops for New Zealand. And New Zealand itself is the Wop Wops. But you know, like Gloriavale is so completely isolated. And I think that's one of the things that ended up happening, is where the control really started to take over, because the people there were living in such isolation from the rest of society. So Gloriavale, everyone in Gloriavale wears a uniform. So I grew up wearing a full blue length dress. It's like, for women, it's like head coverings as well. So we had white head coverings and scarves that we would put on our heads, or a white hat that almost looks like the Amish. And the men would wear blue pants and blue shirt. So women definitely cover up to your neck, down to your ankles and to your wrists, as well as a head covering. And these outfits were designed by my grandfather. So he did visit some of the Amish and Hutterite communities over in the United States and took inspiration from what they were doing and how they were living, because that's the type of community and commune that he had wanted to design. And he really felt like that this is how women should be dressed, because women were, in his view, to be in submission to men. So the head covering was a sign of submission to God and submission to man as well, so any males. So that's how I grew up. I grew up thinking that men were above me and that I had to submit my will to them. And you grow up in a uniform and an outfit every single day that you put on that is reiterating this belief. So really, like Gloriavale, just so people get a sense of it, I think I want to just tell a little bit about what the commune's like, what it's like to live there. How does that sound?
Yeah, perfect. I would love to get into the rules, the daily lifestyle, the ways that you had to conform, and what an interesting fact that it actually was inspired by the Amish, and in some ways was more strict, because at least the Amish could have a little bit of variation in design and color, and your uniform felt a little bit more frilly and feminine, but still not hugging the figure at all. You said in one of your interviews that it was not flattering. You weren't meant to be appealing to men, but that's so interesting that they were connected.
Yeah, and when you say, you weren't meant to be appealing to men, it's like you are supposed to be appealing in a different way, like appealing to a man in the fact that you're submissive to him and he can do whatever he wants to you. So that's a completely different type of attraction, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Like we were very much like, the Gloriavale's highly sexualized. Like everything about the environment, it's purity culture, no sex before marriage, arranged marriages. You come to a marriage as a virgin. For people that aren't virgins, they're looked at as being unclean. And these were really like all the ideologies that I was growing up with. On a day-to-day basis, it really looks like you get up, you put on your uniform, and you live in a hostel. So the hostels usually have about 3 stories, and then there's 12 families that live on 1 story. Each family has 1 room to live in, and there's bunk beds in that room. And the parents have like 1/2 of that room separated by only a curtain from the children. And then the children live in bunk beds in the other side of that room. So like I'm at home now, and the size of my lounge room, just my lounge room, is the size of the room that I grew up with my entire family sharing and living in.
Wow.
Like it's just a completely different world, but it was totally normal to me. So I'd wake up, go to my family closet in this room, put on my dress, go to my shared family mirror. Like we had one, and I was always fighting with my brothers and sisters over trying to get ready in the morning. I'd put my headscarf on, and then we'd go to work. So we worked, and all the work was communal as well. So women were keepers at home. That was how we were taught we were supposed to be. So we only were to do tasks that were like cooking, cleaning, child's care. And all the women were rostered on a 4-team rotating roster to do all these particular tasks. So from a very young age, like 6 years old, I started working in the kitchens. Unpaid work, 6 years old. I'm getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning to go to the kitchens and cook toast for everyone for breakfast, because everyone would come in for breakfast from their homes. I call it homes, but they're hostels, from their rooms really. And then there'd be 6 massive, big, long tables and a huge, big mess hall. And you would sit at your family's assigned slot on those tables, and you would eat whatever was served that morning. So everything was just so communal. And then the school was just next door. Like you would walk out and like, because they run every single part of your life, schooling, housing, clothing, finances, like there's no part of your life that really belongs to you.
Yeah, I'm interested in how these families jumped on board seemingly quickly, because if your grandfather started it, had you already been born, or how did he attract so many families? Based on the footage that I've seen, and you just said 12 families on 1 floor, it seems like there were quite a few people who were wanting to do this?
Yeah. So it kind of got to that point. So by the time I was born, like Gloriavale really started as a small shared community over in Oxford and Christchurch. And at the time, like my grandfather used to tell this story about how he went to church one day and he saw one family rock up and had two beautiful fancy new cars, and another family rocked up and they were pushing their baby in a pram in the rain because they didn't have a car to get to the church. And he said that his intention with it was that there was equality and that there wasn't this disparity between those in poverty and those who were rich. And so it started from this very good place, and people bought into that. Like people bought into wanting a better lives for their families, wanting to live in a community of people where all things were shared. So very slowly, they started to share their belongings in common. So first it was like fishing rods. They would just say, well, let's pull all our fishing rods in one locker, and then one person can run that locker. And if you want to borrow a fishing rod, all you have to do is rock up and ask to borrow it. You don't have to go and buy your own fishing rod. So that becomes super attractive for people who can't afford their own fishing rod, because they can have access to things and live in a way that's a better lifestyle than what they were already experiencing. So that was kind of the progression. And then they started putting their money into the same bank, and then they started running their businesses together. And slowly over time, it just expanded and kind of scaled really to being, okay, well, now we need a bigger farm. So they moved all over to the West Coast, Hauperi Valley. And yeah, by then they plotted out how they were going to build the hostels. And I was a baby at that point. So I, came over, I remember, well, I don't remember when I was a baby, but all of my incredibly young childhood memories were in the valley there. So I was born during this transition period where they were moving from Oxford Cust in Christchurch across, that's on the east coast of New Zealand, to the west coast of New Zealand.
That is interesting. And it does sound appealing and sounds like something that a young family would be interested in, sharing the workload, having a village to raise the kids. And I feel like I'm a broken record here because just yesterday I did an interview with someone from 12 Tribes. I don't know if you're familiar with that group, but it's very similar. It's just all communal. Everyone kind of dresses the same. The childcare is all kind of divvied up. You don't really raise your kids, but then it's so tightly controlled that you can barely breathe without permission. And so before we get into the really difficult parts of life, I think it's worth noting some of the things that you enjoyed or the positive memories that you had growing up as a child until you really understood how tightly controlled it was.
That's the thing with groups and communes and cults like this. There's this real sense of belonging and closeness and community that as a human being is so fulfilling, and that connection that we all kind of crave as social animals it's just there. And so that was really one of the things I loved. Like, instead of having just a small family where, say, now I live in my home with my partner, it's just us living in this home. But for me, growing up, I had a family of 500 who I lived in a home with. I was playing cards with my friends at nights. I was loving working alongside my friends in the kitchens. And you really enjoy those things. You feel like you have purpose and a sense of belonging, and your life is meaningful. I think my best memories were also because the west coast of New Zealand's absolutely stunning. Like, it is prehistoric. It is just the most lush, beautiful rainforest, beautiful black stained beach lakes. Like, it's just incredible. Pastures, mountains, the works. And it's a really untouched part of the world. And I grew up climbing trees in this place and running around with my friends and swimming in the creeks and rivers. And that was the really great part of being in Gloriavale. It's when the control starts to happen and the religion really creeps in. And I can't even say that it crept in at a certain point in my life, because you're literally just constantly immersed in religion at the dinner table, at your school, every single part of your life, what you dress, what you eat is all based around religion, which is Christianity in this case. And they follow the King James version of the Bible, their interpretation of it. It was about 10, and that's the time when I was 10 that you start to be expected to become baptized. So they say once you're 10 years old, you should have enough knowledge to make a decision about your religious beliefs. And at this point, you have to make a decision, am I going to be a Christian? I don't really know that there's any other decision to be made in an environment like that as a 10-year-old. And why would a 10-year-old be in a position to make decisions about their spiritual life? They haven't gone through any life experiences by that point, and they're still children. So at this point, I decided, okay, well, I have to be baptized. That's my next step. So you say to the leaders, I want to be baptized, and you start attending baptism meetings. And this is where I started having some questions, because one of the leaders started to speak in tongues. And I said, the curious Lilia said, well, can you show us how it's done? Because it seems so odd to me. Like, what is this thing where you're possessed by a spirit and then you just speak in a language that you literally have not known? And so the leader demonstrated to me, and I kind of thought, oh, that just sounds very weird. He just sounds like garbled mess coming out of his mouth. But kind of tucked that disbelief into the back of my mind, and obviously still got baptized. Went down to a creek. The whole church gathers on either side of the creek, and it was raining on the day I was baptized. You walk into the water, it was freezing. It was me and a few other children who were getting baptized. And then they believe in full immersion baptism. So you stand there and you declare what you want to say and like what you believe. And really it's just copying things you've heard, things you've been told, what's been rehearsed. Like, you're just saying these things that you've heard so much in the world around you. And then they dunk you under to fully wash away all of your sins, bring you back up, and you're a new person. So I did this at 10 years old. Like, that was my first major event in terms of me becoming a Christian and being inducted into Gloriavale, even though I was born there had lived my whole life there.
Yeah, the same is for Mormons. So I grew up Mormon or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they prefer to be called now. But the age of accountability is what they call it, and that's 8.
Right.
And same thing, you go in there, you even do an interview with the bishop to see if you're worthy or ready, and it's just rehearsed answers like, yes, I believe the church is true. Yes, I believe Joseph Smith is a true prophet. And I mean, I don't even remember my interview because I was a kid, and to me, I was just like, sure, yes, whatever you want. Yes, I want to get baptized.
What else are you going to say?
Yeah, if you don't, you're the odd one out. Shame on your family. And it always kind of drives me crazy when I see these posts from people who are like, I'm just so proud of my daughter who chose to get baptized. I'm like, she didn't choose anything. Like, she didn't really have a choice. Did she really have a choice to say no? Did she know that she could say no? Probably not.
Yeah. And
you think that you want it because everyone is praising you for making that choice. And so it's the illusion of choice that I talk about all the time, where you think that you can do whatever you want within these rules, but I'm choosing to follow those rules. So it's really not a terrible thing. And people who grew up in these environments, specifically in your case where you're completely isolated, that's all you don't know any different. Now looking back on those childhood things or the positives or things that maybe you didn't really like or understand, but it was your normal, can you think back to some memories where you're like, you know what, that was actually really problematic from my new perspective?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So like, you talk about shame, and just to touch on what you mentioned about children making decisions in the age of accountability, is I don't believe that there are Christian children. There are just children of Christian parents who have taught them to be a certain way. Because at when you're a child, you are not in a position to make decisions about your life like that. And you're not fully developed. Your brain isn't even fully developed. But you talk about shame, the shame that if I don't do this, then what will my friends think? What will my family think? I'll be rejected. I'll be shunned. Like, shunning is a really big part of how Gloriavale have lived. So it was the whole, I am come to tear a man asunder from his family and wife, that kind of thing. Like, it was religion being taught in a way that if you don't believe what I believe, then you have no place here. And that if you don't turn your back on friends or family who don't believe or submit to what the leaders say, then, and have no contact with them and just break contact, then, you're not being a good Christian and you're putting your own salvation at risk. So these practices of shunning became like, that was one of the things where I was like, that doesn't seem right to me. Naturally, I'm a very loving, nurturing, protective person. And then I just look at some of the things that I was doing and saying to friends and family who had left Gloriavale. And I'm like, how could I have been that person as a child? How could I say those things? And it's because of the environment that I was in that was forcing me to say, well, I want nothing to do with you, kind of thing. And then also the shaming, like, there were the meal times that I described where you've got all the big tables. So there's a big stage up in front of that's used for concerts, performances, talks, speeches, all that kind of thing. So if someone was misbehaving or someone wasn't fitting into the rules or the things that they were told to do, I remember they would get marched up on the stage and be made to turn around with their back to the audience and stand on stage, like the entire meal table, to just shame them for their behavior.
Oh, wow.
Very quickly, you learn that you don't want to be put in that position. And parents learn that they need to try to discipline their children first so their children aren't put in even worse situations. So it just becomes this toxic, like, abuse that just filters down from the leadership, where it's, parents are actually abusing their children and like strapping them and like trying to get them in line first in order to almost protect them from a worse level of punishment, where they would be taken into, like you say, bishops. We called them the servants and shepherds, which is a group of men who run and control the community and make all the decisions. So if there were young people who were not fitting into Gloriavale or not being, they called them rebellious, they would be taken into these meetings that were hours and hours long, where they were just completely harassed and like just told they were going to hell, they're a shit person, they're like filled with the devil, they're filled with Satan, they're completely worthless and useless to their community. It's just hours upon hours of psychological torture to these teenagers who are trying to find their way in the world. And that's what happens if you disagree. So these were the things I started to see, and I was like, this doesn't feel right to me. Something feels wrong. But I'm a kid growing up in this environment. I didn't even know what was quite wrong in a lot of instances, because I'm taught that these things are right and good. But then there's this natural, my conscience that started, and my critical thinking that started to kind of drop in. And I was like, I don't think this is right. And then there was a very graphic example where I remember being in a high school classroom, and one of the leaders who was the shepherd, so there were 3 shepherds, so he's the top of the top in Gloriavale. He charged into this room, we're in high school at this point, rips his son out of his chair, marches him to the front of the class, bends him over, pulls his pants down, and starts belting him with a leather belt because he's been evil or wrong or whatever. And I just couldn't even look at it. And I was like, this is wrong. And I'm a high schooler sitting there, and I'm like, I'm not looking at this. This is wrong. I can't watch this. And that was when my respect for the leaders started to really crumble, because I was like, why am I living in this place where it's okay to do these kind of things? It's just completely inappropriate, cruel, like just wrong.
Yeah, it's incredibly common, especially with groups here in the US that are more of the fundamentalist evangelical or fundamentalist Christian, where they use the Bible to not only justify child abuse, but encourage it. And was it the same there, where that was seen as a biblical thing to do, and this father felt like he was justified and he needed to do it in order to essentially, in his mind, beat the sin out of this young kid?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, people are completely radicalized in environments like that, and people with a tendency to be too extreme anyway just basically can kind of get away with it because it's so encouraged, and they're seen as being the good ones. So, and this person, he was definitely a person, one of those personalities where he was so extreme with everything. Like, gosh, some of the stories I could tell, like, just horrible stories. But you're totally right. Like, it's the spare the rod, spoil the child. So this is love. Like, if I don't hit you, I don't love you, which is just mental. Like, now as an adult, the idea of like hitting one of my little nieces or nephews is just insane to me. But I grew up watching babies get beat black and blue, like babies.
What?
Because they were crying. That's crazy to me now. Like, and looking back, these are the experiences that really, growing up, it was all the abuse that I was seeing that ultimately kind of was leading me to this point of, is this somewhere I want to be?
That's what creates such a dangerous environment too. Aside from the obvious abuse, you're teaching these children that abuse should be accepted, which creates scenarios for kids to not understand that maybe they're in an even worse situation, but they don't question it because they're used to being put down and harmed by authorities. And so it could go so much further than just physical abuse. It could go emotional, sexual, spiritual abuse. I mean, you've talked about your own experiences of how you were shamed by your own grandfather just for experience, or just by demonstrating leadership qualities. And I want to get to that story too. But first, I want to hear your thoughts on anything else that you noticed going awry or going unchecked because of this environment of control and submission to the authorities.
Well, you talk about all the forms of abuse, and I've lived in and seen people experience literally all of these. So you're right. It's the environment creates this environment that is so toxic, where these types of things start to thrive, because there's absolutely no accountability. So growing up, we believed and we were taught that my grandfather was connected to God. So the word of God came from God through him to us, which meant that every single thing that he said was actually God speaking to us, which means that why would you ever question that or hold that accountable or believe that to be wrong? So my grandfather actually he had multiple counts of assault and charges against him, went through a big court battle about it. He was jailed, if you didn't know this. So he was jailed for a long period of time. People in Gloriavale, when I was growing up, we didn't know this. We knew he'd spent time in jail, but the propaganda was he was persecuted for his faith and what he believed in.
The amount of times I hear this story, it drives me insane. It happens in every single group where there's the self-proclaimed prophet, because they can get away with anything and it makes their members believe it even more.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a lot of families later started to leave Gloriavale as they found this out and as this was exposed. And as people, like, I wrote about this in my book, and then it's also in Sins of the Father by Fleur Beale, amazing author. It's the story of my uncle, who's Neville Cooper, my grandfather Neville Cooper. It's his son, Phil Cooper, wrote the book as well. And it talks about all of this. Like, we had no clue that any of this was happening. And there were some people that knew about it, but also excused the behavior. Like, oh, he was just trying to help that married couple with their sex life. And things like this that were just like, so most of us growing up in Gloriavale didn't know so much of the history because it was hidden from us. And how can you make decisions when there's no information given to you? So there's no television or radio or so like internet in Gloriavale either. There is internet for business purposes, but it's all highly, highly controlled. There's no cell phones. So this is when I was growing up. I think it's a little bit different now because there's been a lot of accountability through the courts in New Zealand now, because we've been really fighting for the rights of the people living in there. But this is how this is why it's so dangerous in those environments. It's a bubble of just complete immersion in one way of thinking and one ideology with one person at the top who's completely unchecked and completely unaccountable.
Was there a board? You talked about people that you would have to be held accountable toward in those meetings. Were they kind of within this hierarchy, or was he truly just at the top making all the decisions?
Yeah, so he was called the overseeing shepherd. And then there were 2 supporting shepherds. So they were the 3 shepherds. So that's the structure. And then there were, I believe it was 10 or 12 other men that managed different parts of the business. So it might be, my father, for example, was in the moss business and he was looking after that. And then there might be another person who's in, looks after the farming business, the construction business. So Gloriavale has a lot of businesses, and they do very well because over the years they've had completely free labor because of the way they've structured the lifestyle. They don't pay anyone anything, and they take tax benefits from the government because they are registered as a charity. So that kind of is the structure really. And then you've got, my mother was actually, in terms of females, she was what we would call a house mother. So she was the highest authority that you could have as a female. And then there were a couple of other women who worked in the office supporting her. They didn't really have named titled roles, but they were sort of seen to be the leadership group of women. And then all the women who were rostered on teams, there were the team leaders, and then there were just the workers on the teams as well. So there's very much this clear structure to the way that the organization and the institution functions.
Mm-hmm. If they have many successful businesses, but none of the money's really going to anyone in particular, how would you request funds for something that you needed?
Well, you don't need money because everything's provided. So if I needed tampons, I would go to the woman who looks after the locker of tampons and pads and stuff for women's periods, like if I needed painkillers, and then I would ask that this is what I need, and then it would just be given to me, and everything was kept like a quota. So families would have these budgets, but they weren't real. So you could get allocated a certain, if you wanted a Moro bar, there's a communal candy area, but it's all locked up. But if you wanted a Moro bar, you could go buy a Moro bar from there, but not with real money. But you have to go through the system and it gets deducted from your family's sort of allowance for things like that. But the money itself was all kept in communal bank accounts. We didn't need it on a daily basis. We had no interaction with the world around us. The food we ate was put on the table. The clothes were all made in the communal room. So yeah, there was no need for money really.
Okay. Random side note, I'm shocked that you were allowed tampons.
Oh, right. Really?
Yeah, there are so many groups here. They've nicknamed them devil sticks. They think that they take your virginity. It's a whole thing.
Right. Yeah. Gloriavale's, I would say it's a little bit different from some groups. in that some of the ways that they do things are really modern, but then other things are completely archaic. I think this has kind of come through from my grandfather. Like, he was like really innovative. He was an engineer. He was always thinking of how to improve things and build things. And he was very practical too. And so I think to a degree, there's almost this like disparity there where there's like these complete polar opposites of like, well, they're very modern and innovative, but also very, very outdated as well.
Yeah. What if somebody needed more extreme medical care, surgery, or outpatient? Was that allowed?
It was allowed, but it would take a long time for you to get to hospital. So in emergencies, it's like it wasn't the best situation over there just because they're so far away. I think the closest town would be about an hour and a half drive. So, for example, my auntie, when she was having her baby, one of her babies really struggled, was having problems. So I remember we got in the back of a work van with a dirty old mattress in the back of there and a sheet. And she was giving birth while we were driving to the closest town to try and get her medical help. And then she just had to, like, it ended up happening, and she just had to, I held her hand as she had her baby on the side of the road on the West Coast in the back of a van on a mattress.
Oh my God.
So, like, yes, we're allowed to access medical care in severe situations, but for normal situations, like the day-to-day stuff, it's really looked down on if you're sick. And if there's like there's something wrong with you, like you're being a sissy or you're just being a hypochondriac. So like the medical care was incredibly poor. Like I know people who've lost all of their teeth in Gloriavale and they're not going to get those teeth back now, like because the medical care was just so bad.
You had mentioned in previous interviews birth control was not allowed. So I'm assuming people did have a lot of children. Did you have access to any sort of prenatal care or certified midwives, or was it just kind of let's just hope for the best unless there's an emergency?
Yeah, so on the West Coast, because it's very, very rural, there are travelling midwives, and they service all the farmers and all the people who live on the West Coast, not just Gloriavale. But they would do, because there is constant childbirth in Gloriavale. Like, I'm one of 10 children, same mother and father, and most of my cousins are families of 10, 13, 12, all big families.
Ooh.
Yeah, it was like, they used to say that quote, happy is the man that hath his quiver full, which basically meant you should have lots and lots of children. So my grandfather had 16 children and 3 wives. There were traveling midwives who would come around because there was always pregnant women. I just feel like most of my life my mother was pregnant, and then I became a caregiver at a very, very young age because you've got all these kids. 2 parents is not enough to look after them. And also my father traveled for work a lot and my mum was in this leadership position.
Mm-hmm.
So the midwives would come around, they would do their checks, and then Gloriavale also got some women that they certified to become midwives so they could have their own midwives on site. And it was all home births. So I think I watched my first baby be born at 10 years old. The baby was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around its neck, black and blue. I do feel like that has, to a degree, almost traumatized me when it comes to childbirth. But also, like, this is how we were taught about childbirth. It was very natural and we were strong and our bodies could take it, to the degree that they would not even let women, I know I've got friends who have left, they would not even let women who it was dangerous and having another child would kill them go on birth control. That's how strong the belief is.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had friends and who I grew up with leave the cult because they were like, well, this is gonna kill me. So when you're having to choose between your life and the rules of the society you live in, you're gonna choose your life. So yeah, it was very like I say, archaic in that way.
What's so frustrating is that they have so many seeds of goodness as far as being a community and taking care of each other, and in some ways just being one big family. And I'm not even against home birth when it's a low risk pregnancy, but the thing is they take away choice. So you don't have the option of going to the hospital if you just want to be in a hospital setting. You're just told that this is how it's going to be and deal with it. And so it really perverts something that can be so beautiful, because I'm sure a lot of women did have beautiful experiences with their home births, but then also what about the women who are having these extremely traumatic experiences, and maybe the baby doesn't make it or their mother doesn't make it because there was no care on, is this a high risk pregnancy? Should we have her in a room full of doctors and maybe surgeons if it comes to that? I mean, what about the case of an emergency C-section? Did that ever happen that you noticed?
I believe there were some emergency C-sections. So I know that some of my cousins had to have C-sections, and in those cases, they would allow them to go into hospital and have them, because ultimately they don't want their women to die.
Yeah.
They want the birth to go well. So they do allow access to modern medical care for circumstances like that. But it's this idea of that, even if it's not good for you, and even if the doctors are saying to you, it's going to kill you, don't have another baby. Well, God wants you to have another baby. So if you shouldn't, then God won't give you one. So it's God's choice over your life. And I think that's a really interesting point, because when you're so in this environment that encourages you to just submit your will to God, and if you don't, then you're just being stubborn and rebellious, and it creates this environment where people think, if I'm not giving up what I want, if I'm not doing things against my will, then I'm not a good Christian. So doing things against your will is so highly encouraged that it makes everybody fit into these roles and these beliefs and these systems that they don't actually agree with, because they believe that they'll lose their salvation otherwise.
Yeah.
And as Christians, their salvation's the most important thing in the world. So the driver is so high, when you believe in heaven or hell and you think, well, I'm going to go to hell if I don't do as I'm told, that just allows the leaders and of the church to have absolute complete control over what you should do.
Exactly. The stakes are too high to even consider pushing back.
Yeah.
And what would you do anyway? You can't just get up and leave in most cases, especially if you're born there. And if everyone around you, including your parents, is saying this is the way, you don't have any other options. I want to talk about education a little bit. And with hindsight, if you feel you did get a good education.
That's a really interesting question. I feel like I got a basic education. In Gloriavale, women are not encouraged to pursue higher education, because you're always going to end up in a role where you're a mother at home and a wife who's looking after her husband, working in the sewing room and washing clothing on a board in the laundry. So why would you need a higher education if that's going to be your life? So there were women in Gloriavale who I know were incredibly ambitious and wanted to do additional education. And we used to talk about this in high school, oh, should we do extra education? But I just didn't even feel like it was an option for me at all. So there's no pathways for women in situations like that to have a career, because their role in life and what their life will look like is already predetermined. So when your role is predetermined, why would you ever try to dream or think of how you could do things differently? And also, how could you do things differently? You don't have your own money, so you can't go to college. You don't even know what college is, or that college is even an option. You have no vehicle to get to college, even if you could go to college. You have no internet access to educate yourself about these options. So it's not an option at all. And Gloriavale would say, well, if people wanted to, they could leave and they could go to college. That's their choice. It's not your choice when you have no options and you have no power to make any of that happen for yourself. You were simply in a circumstance at that point. So that's like my thoughts around education, because they let the men get education to become like a vet or to become like an engineer or the trades that they needed and felt like they needed for the business. But you weren't allowed to do any education unless it was clearly needed in the community as a role to help the community grow. And that's how it was approached.
It was so interesting to see that clip of you 10 years, well, it's 16, and then 10 years later after leaving. So what are the chances that they would allow this journalism team to come in and you were kind of the focus point of this story? And then now you're speaking out against it later, and watching the two side by side was so interesting. And one of the questions that the journalist asked you was, you don't have any aspirations to become a vet, or I think it was a doctor or something. And you guys were just like, what do you mean? Is that an option?
Yeah, it's totally not. And I also remember that particular interview. Like, we were taken by this same leader who punished his son in front of the high school very violently. He took us into a room and basically told us, this is what you have to say, this is how you have to behave. Do you know how you're saying things?
Wow.
Everything is just drilled into you that this is how you say and do things. And you think that you're wanting to do it as well. You think that you're choosing this. But really, when you're a child in that environment, you're just being completely brainwashed, because you're not being told, if you don't want to do this, it's okay. Like, you're being told, this is the best thing you can possibly do. Your family's so proud of you. You know, all these like things that as a child, you're like, oh, this sounds amazing. So you just do what you're told really in those situations. But yeah, so much of that, the voice that we had was just not ours. And I think after leaving Gloriavale, it was really about going, well, my voice is mine now. So instead of using it as I've had to in the past for others, it's about using my voice for myself and for what I truly believe, not about what I'm being told to say or what society wants me to say.
It seemed like you were a member who truly wanted to follow the rules and be a good member of the community, especially because you had all eyes on you if your grandfather is the leader or considered this prophet of sorts. And there's a moment where it seems like it was pivotal for you when he did publicly shame you, and it was out of nowhere because it seemed like something he should have been congratulating you for. And it was the opposite. You were completely shamed. So could you talk about what happened and how that made you feel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very much the good girl growing up, and I am not the good girl now. But growing up, I was the good girl, and my siblings were the black sheep. So I really was raised with all this languaging around, well, don't make your parents ashamed of you, and make sure that you don't end up like those people or those kids. And so I was always like trying to please, and also pleasing as a means to survive. So if I don't please my parent in this instant, I know I'm going to get hurt. Like, I'm going to get strapped and belted. I'm going to get experience some type of physical pain. So my method to survive this was simply to try and do everything fucking perfect and never do anything wrong. And so it created this like perfectionism disorder in me, where I was wanting to do everything right and be the perfect Christian girl in Gloriavale. What happened is this was completely out of alignment with my natural personality and who I truly am as a person. So when I was I think this is like the second year of school at this point. I'm just fresh into school, and we had this lovely old woman who was our teacher, and she wrote me a beautiful report, because school reports, they got read out at the dinner table in front of everybody. So they were like the most important thing, that you had to get it right. Otherwise, you were stuffed. So she wrote this beautiful report that said Lilia demonstrates leadership skills which could be useful as she gets older. nothing wrong with that sentence. But apparently, my grandfather, male chauvinist cult leader, thought this little girl is a threat to my regime. So I'm going to take this report and I'm going to read it out at the dinner table in front of everyone. And at first, when he started reading it, because he has a stack of reports that he was going through, and he started reading it, and I'm thinking, this is awesome. I got a really good report. I got A's. Like, this is going to be great. Next thing I hear is him saying, we don't want women like you. And he just berated me for hours. Like, not even just like a single comment either. This is like, we are going to make an example of you for something that you are good at, leadership, and we are going to let every single other little girl and woman in this room know that this is not okay and we don't accept this. And he just completely used me as an example to tear apart every other woman in the room. And I completely dissociated. I remember the time just passing by like it was a blink of an eye. And the only reason I knew it like an hour had passed was because I looked up at the little ticking clock on the wall and I was like, has this been going that long? Like, I just tears in my eyes. I just was like, don't understand what's happening here, but it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. I must have done something wrong. And then as children, this is how we start to internalize all of the things that happen to us. And afterwards, after the meal, took our plates into the kitchen, scraping off the scraps into the scrap bin. And my auntie came up and she actually said, are you okay? Because she could obviously see this was impacting me. And I just said, oh, yes, he must be right. You know, I do just need to be quieter. Or I said something along the lines of just that I needed to make myself smaller to fit into what he thought a little girl should be. So that was my experience, and a very core experience of, well, this is where women fit in this world, and this is what is okay, and you are not okay if you have anything that we don't agree with.
What were your parents' reactions to that? Did they speak with you afterward?
Not really. I mean, my mum might have had a conversation. The thing is that the children and the parents have no control over the situation. You're all in the same environment. And I'm not excusing my parents at all. It's more just that they have when you live in an environment like Gloriavale where you have absolutely no control over your life or choice, you also have no choice in how to raise your children. So I know that when my auntie was like very sick and she's experienced chronic illnesses, and the leaders used to come into her bedroom when she was in bed and berate her and say she didn't have enough faith because she was sick. And in the same way, they come into your home and tell you how you have to be and act with your children and how you have to raise your children. And then if you're not doing it the way that they say, you run the risk of getting kicked out of the community with nothing but the clothes on your back, no money. And so you have to find a way to survive in this environment. And so you're going to try to survive in whatever way that you can. And sometimes I believe that as parents, it was like, well, not how can we keep our children safe, but just how can we survive this entire situation?
Mm-hmm.
It's so messed up. Like, even as I say it and I think, like, I'm just like, this is so messed up. How can we have lived like that? But that was the reality. You didn't have a say in how you would raise your little kids.
Well, not only that, but they are assigning you a spouse. That's a really big deal. And I think that also impacted you in really understanding that you didn't want to be a part of that when you saw your friends getting married. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think it would be good to talk about like what marriage looks like in Gloriavale. So marriage is touted as the end all be all for a woman. Your goal in life is to get married and be a wife and be a housewife. And similarly to everything in Gloriavale, it is taught to us in such a way that God tells the leaders who should be married, and then they tell those people that God has told them, and then those people are arranged to be married. They say it's not arranged, but it's totally arranged. They also have to arrange it for practical purposes because they refuse to intermarry with other churches because they're so isolated. So unless the marriages are arranged, there will be issues with the bloodlines crossing. So they would have a book of these are all the bloodlines, and this is how we have to make sure that we don't intermarry families and people who are actually related by blood. So that's also part of a practical reason why marriages are arranged. So what happened is we'd have these big wedding days. The couples would be told 2 weeks before the wedding who they would marry. You've known these people all your life, but you may like them, you may not be able to stand them, but you get told 2 weeks before you're getting married in 2 weeks. So then we'd have this big wedding day, the two young people that are getting married, and they would marry young people from the age of 16, which is like what's legal in New Zealand. So with the consent of a parent, you can be married at 16. So some people were being married as young as 16. You have your first kiss in front of the entire community who are all seated in a big circle around you. You say your wedding vows and then you kiss for the first time. And it's graphic. And these kids have no idea what they're doing. As an adult looking back now, it's absolutely vile. But this is what we were shown to be normal. God loves a man who enjoys his woman's body and all that kind of just really overly sexualized.
So they're like really getting into it, these kids.
They're like really getting into it. There's hands everywhere. And there are like literally the whole community is all around.
Oh my gosh.
And all the children are there too. So this is how highly sexualized these wedding environments are. And then this couple go away. Like there's no real skin involved, but like it's happening. So these couples go away that afternoon. They get taken over to a house where they have to consummate their marriage for the first time. And they cannot come back to the community and for their marriage feast until that has happened. So they consummate their marriage and everyone knows that this is what's happening. And then after the deed is done, they come back and then we all have a big marriage feast. And during this whole time, these couples are very blissed out, but it's just like we've all known what's happened. And you grow up thinking that this is normal. And they're just like horny little teenagers who are graphically displaying everything and thinking that this is normal in an environment where this is completely normalized. So let's just think about how that impacts children and what they think is okay and not okay.
Yeah.
So when I just remember walking through the kitchen and I would see like men with their hands in places I don't even want to think about, like just in the kitchen publicly doing this kind of thing. And so that creates this completely overly sexualized environment, which is why there's been so much sexual abuse happen in Gloriavale, and was very, for me, growing up, like the vicarious trauma of that was really, really hard. So I know I've gone off track a little bit, like where you asked about marriage and I'm talking about sex abuse.
No, that's okay.
It just feels really relevant.
It is. And what an interesting combination. This is the first time that I've heard an environment where purity culture is so extreme, but also public displays of affection are encouraged and normalized, usually don't go together. And so I can see how even more so it creates this paradise for predators to do whatever they want.
100%. Absolutely. And so your kind of whole idea of marriage is very warped, and relationships is very warped as well. When I say warped, I mean warped compared to what I believe now, but in that environment, it's normal. And so this is your fate as a woman and a girl growing up in Gloriavale, and you kind of just accept that because there's no choices and options for you, as we've discussed. So what happened is some of my friends were in my family, my cousins were being made to marry these guys that they just couldn't stand, and just they had to accept it. And even their parents didn't want it to happen, but they had to accept it because they had no choice otherwise. Their choice was to be completely kicked out of a community, lose their livelihood, and have to survive in a world that they know nothing about. So it's really just survival to stay and do as you're told. And then Gloriavale started this outreach to India where they were like, this is our charitable outreach. We're going to bring in people from India, the underprivileged, and we're going to build a community in India to help the poor and provide schooling. So it all sounds really great on paper, and it's also a great place to put money that you don't want to pay tax on. My best friend was told that she had to marry this guy from India. He didn't want to marry her. She didn't want to marry him, but she was distraught over the fact that this was what her life was going to be and she had no say in it. And I remember this pivotal moment where she came and told me this was happening, and I love this girl. So I'm like, then you have to leave. Like, there's no choice. You have to get out. You either marry him or you run away. And so she packed her bags, somehow contacted someone on the outside to come get her. She got found out, she got dragged through a leaders meeting, but ultimately she stayed her course and she still left. And that was a moment where I was like, if I'm telling her that she's allowed to leave, I'm allowed to leave too. Because why should I have to be put in these situations? And I've got all these little sisters. I don't want this for them either.
Yeah.
So that was a real moment for me when I was like, I have to get out. I can't do this.
What's also unique about your story is your whole family was feeling the same way, including your parents, which is very rare. Let's talk about how they came to that decision of we're just going to take the whole family.
Yeah. So that was really rare. Like over the years, as people left Gloriavale, it would just be one person here or there, like a solitary black sheep who just left Gloriavale. And this was the first time in many, many years that a whole family had left. So my father was actually one of the shepherds, and my mother, as I said, was the house mother. And I think this has gone a long way to like actually allowing other families to leave Gloriavale, because there's been a massive exodus of families from Gloriavale since that point. And I think it was about 15 years ago at this point. What happened is my siblings ran away from home very young. So I had two older siblings, and they both ran away when they were 15 because they just couldn't do it. There was a horrible environment for them. My parents wanted to look after their children. They wanted to support their children who were essentially living on the streets. But Gloriavale was saying, you can't. So the way they pitched it to Gloriavale was, well, we believe if we support our children, then they might come back to Gloriavale. And that went down quite well since they both were in positions of authority, and we got permission to live in this like halfway house where we were living in Gloriavale, schooling every single day, but at night we would go home and live with our siblings who were worldly and dressed in jeans and all the naughty things, pierced ears, and we would live with them in the evenings, and then we would go back to Gloriavale during the day. So there was the start of this transitional phase, and as time passed, it ended up that we became more and more in love with our independence, and my family was like having the right, like we were able to get a bit of money to spend on our own, and just, you know, being able to have one room that I could only share with one of my sisters was like insane and amazing to me. And so we started having these freedoms, and because we were in a town where there was normal society there, so I was exposed to like what this music sounded like and what it would look like to wear other clothes. And so I started to experiment with these things, and my parents were not as strict about all of that. It was still a transitional time, but that's kind of what eventually happened. And then it was reaching the point where the leaders were saying, this has gone on for too long. You choose your family or you choose the church. And that's it. We'd just gotten our family back together. And I remember, though, I really struggled with making the decision to leave, because in Gloriavale, there's this thing that they get everyone to sign. It's a legally binding document called the commitment. And basically, you sign over all of your assets and belongings in your life to Gloriavale and to the leaders. And I made that commitment on national television when I was 17 years old. I'd made this commitment. I said to my mum, if you leave, I can't come with you, because I didn't feel like I could. And then over the course of a year, as more and more things happened, I was like, no, I think I can leave. I think it's not a sin to wear pants. And slowly my beliefs were transitioning and changing, and I was changing. And eventually my parents said, well, we're going to leave. We want to do it in a respectful way. Let's try and go and ask the leaders for permission, so my father, I remember the day that we left, and I write about this in my book in detail. We were at the Sunday dinner all together with the community, and then I went and took all the kids and put them in their beds in our shared family room. At that point, my mum was still over at the house that we were sharing. I waited and and was like, where is he? Why hasn't he come out of this meeting? You know, I was getting really stressed about it. And then I walked out across the bridge to find him from the main house, and he was walking back to me and he was crying. And I've never seen my dad cry in my life. So I was like, the world is ending. And he was like, you put all the kids in the car. We're going right now. So everyone was sleeping at this point because we had a Sunday downtime. So we packed all the kids in the car, raced over to where my mother was packing at the other house, in the halfway house where we'd been living. And we basically bundled all into the car and then drove all the way from the West Coast to the East Coast to start our new life. That's just crazy.
Wow. Did you guys know what you were going to do when you got there? Did you have a plan?
I don't necessarily. I think that my parents had some contacts on the outside, but we just went to a place from an outside church, and there was a house that we could have for a few days. It was really about how do we transition, and we had to rely on help and support from other people. So we lived in free housing for a lot of the start of our life out here. It was just whatever people could give us for free because we had nothing.
Let's talk about that transition period where you were fully out, not even going to the compound at all, and starting to figure out who you are. I know that there was a moment where you had this sort of breakdown when you realized, do I even believe in all these things? Or was I just lied to my whole life? And what is true and what is not? And who am I? So if you can explain what that was like.
Yeah, so we started going to another church out here, which was, it was a nice way to not be so shocked, because honestly, the whole thing was just a complete shock to the system.
Yeah.
You just go into a state of shock. To a degree, it's really exciting as well. You have a brand new life ahead of you. There's all these options. I was like, oh my gosh, I could be a teacher if I wanted to. What do I want to do with my life? And we started going to churches, and I made lots of friends in these churches, which was really great. And I was talking to people that I'd been raised in Gloriavale, and we were taught everyone outside of Gloriavale is the enemy. They're only in Gloriavale, which is the one true church of God, and then the world outside is just completely demonized. So I was like, oh my, there's actually nice people out here. I'm actually making friends as a teenager, and I was enjoying going to church. And it kind of got to the point where I wanted to have more experiences. I wanted to try alcohol for the first time, and I wanted to figure out what I wanted in life, because I felt like I'd always just been what I had been told to be, and I'd lived in a way to survive my environment, but never had these choices. So I decided that I wanted to have sex, and this is really when I decided to leave the church. I wanted to have sex. I wanted to experience what that was like, but it was seen as fornication, evil and wicked, you're ruining your body. No man will ever want you. And I had sort of shed off those beliefs, and I was like, no, this is something I'm going to do for myself. And sexual empowerment was actually the reason I believe that I was able to leave the church, it was like the last straw for me, because I was like, no, I'm not buying into this again.
Well, that's how it is for women, right? When your entire worth is put upon your virginity, it really feels like a no going back moment, even though the concept of virginity I just loathe in its entirety now.
Right.
But back then it was like, there is no going back from losing your virginity. And it feels like that's the moment of, okay, I'm making this decision.
Yeah, like you burn all your bridges, right?
Yeah.
Like I felt like I couldn't go back from this decision, but I made that decision and it felt so empowering, so right for me. And I was just so happy that I had this, and it told me I had choice over my body because I could do these things. At the time, my parents were still Christian. I discussed none of this with them. So I didn't know anything about safety or any of those normal sex ed things that you should absolutely just know as a teenager. But so I made this choice for myself. And after that, that was really my permission to leave the church and start to find myself. And it was, Gloriavale has been in the news a lot. Over here, it's constantly on TV and not for good reasons either. It's very triggering as an ex-leaver to constantly see that and to feel like you have to rehash your life every time that happens. And so I started journaling and writing and trying to understand what had happened to me. And what was a very dark journal on my laptop kind of turned into a memoir, because I wanted to take all of this darkness out of my body, because I was carrying so much trauma, so much heaviness, so many horrific memories that I didn't want and didn't ask for and didn't deserve. So I started writing to really pull that out of my body and heal myself. I wanted to make a difference to everyone that was going through similar situations as well. I wanted to let them know that if I can leave a cult and have sex, you can too, you know? Yeah. It seems so simple, but for me it was so powerful.
No, it is powerful. And that's what's so beautiful about it is when you leave a high control group, simplicity is power just because there's choice behind it. It doesn't have to be revolutionary. You don't have to have this big aha moment of, oh, I'm going to be a doctor. It can literally be, I'm going to wear jeans today. And that is power because you chose it yourself.
Yeah. It's those small little choices. So writing my book was incredibly hard for me. Like I went through box after box of tissues. It was cathartic, but in a great way, but in a horrible way too. But it's the best thing I have ever done for myself because it allowed me to heal and unlocked parts of myself to heal that not writing or sharing my story would have allowed me to do. So this is why we break silence, because it lets us heal our own stories. And I'm getting emotional. This is why I love the work that I've chosen to do today, because I help people tell their stories in books, on stages, to build their personal brands, because our stories heal us, and they not only heal us, they heal the world. And I'm a big believer that stories don't heal in the dark. Like when we bring the light in and can shine that light on those parts of ourselves that hurt so much, and the inner child in us that has been so like abused.
Yeah.
That's really, to me, how healing begins. And I'm not saying everyone has to tell their story on the TEDx stage like I have, or write their story into a memoir like I have. I'm just saying that that's where healing truly happens, I believe, although everyone's journey is completely different.
Right. Through my research, especially since people started mentioning Gloriavale or wanting us to cover it, I kept trying to find survivors who have spoken out. And it seemed like you're pretty much the face of the group after leaving. And I'm sure that has a lot of pros and cons, but what has it been like being in the spotlight for, I think you said you wrote the book 8 years ago. What has that transition been for you? Have you had any backlash from the group, or basically just pros and cons of that?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I feel like I've had a lot of backlash. Like I've had death threats, and I think a lot of people just don't want, it's so interesting, right? Because I'm an expert on my own story and no one can tell your story. It belongs to you. But it was a lot of religious extremists that I got the backlash from when I shared my story, because I was particularly talking about religion, and they didn't like the fact that I was choosing to not wear a head covering, or that I was choosing to like live my life on my own terms. It was hard, but it was also amazing because I in turn had this incredible audience of readers from around the world, from like young kids sending me pictures holding up my book and smiling and being like, oh my God, I found your book in the library, to like people who are like, I'm 60 years old and I absolutely loved your story and I feel like I have a new lease on life, to people who, like a man who was still in a highly controlling religious environment, who's like, I read your story and now I feel like I've got to treat my wife differently.
Whoa.
So I had this amazing support and these amazing testimonials from readers. And then in the same time, I just had the people who were just right. I literally have a folder on my emails called hate mail, and I don't open it. I don't read it. But at the time, that was incredibly difficult for me, which is why it was so important that I had support. And I did have support through that. I had a speaker coach and his wife who I'm very, very close with, and very good friends of mine, who were holding me through that process. I didn't have a lot of support from my family because it was hard for them. So I felt like to some degree I was doing it alone, and that's completely understandable. Like, it's a very personal story. My perception and my experience of us leaving is not their story either. I'm only telling my story from my perspective, but it's still hard because I'm telling what they believe to be our story on, national television and international media, even here with you, right? So I've really had to learn that my story belongs to me, and that I have a right to speak and to share my story.
Mm-hmm.
And my story belongs to no one else, and no one can silence me. For a girl who has grown up being told women should sit down and be quiet and women are not to speak up, these were the beliefs that I was taught, to now I'm absolutely none of those things. And I think that's the most empowering thing, to have gone from this place where I'm turning my pain now into my power. And I think that that's just so empowering.
Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how you were able to not flip your personality, but discover it, because it takes so long to not only deconstruct the beliefs, but deconstruct the identity you've been given and figure out who you actually are aside from all of that and that programming and conditioning. Was it time that just allowed you to do that? Was it exposure to the world? Was it writing your book? What would you say are the main things that really helped you become who you are today?
Yeah, all of the above. It was a bit of everything. I've always been a really curious mind. I'm not afraid of asking the hard questions, and I'm not afraid of asking those questions of myself either. I've been able to build such strong self-trust and faith in myself. Like, I'm not a Christian today. I have left Christianity. I identify atheist, but I still believe that I am a woman of faith because I have such deep faith and trust in myself. And that has come with time and healing and me being willing to face my demons. It's hard though, because that's not an easy thing to do. There's an incredible amount of pain that comes along with that. And so this is why I look at people who have shared their stories and are like doing amazing things in the world, and I'm like, you're so incredible, because it's not just what you're doing, it's the pain that you have endured to get to this point.
Yeah.
Like anything in life, anything incredible and life-changing, like just having a child, the pain that you have to go through to birth that child is incredible. And so I truly believe it was my, I guess, bravery to face my pain and to hold it and to know that I'm strong enough to hold it. And don't get me wrong, there are days that I have not felt strong enough to hold it. And that's when I've just had to go, where are the systems and support that I need? And I've gone through my journey with therapy, with getting coaching, with, getting people to hold me through that process when I feel like I can't hold myself, and trying to make sure that I'm always connected.
And it's definitely not a linear process either. And I think people tend to think that it is, where they're like, okay, you leave the cult and then it's just all uphill from there, which is not the case at all. Ups, downs, valleys, plateaus, like you name it, we've gone through it. I think we're almost the exact same age, born in 90, right?
Yeah, 90.
Yeah, so I was born
Oh,
in 90,
wow.
and I think we left our groups around the same time. And so I'm curious, because we have such a parallel journey in that way, because we have similar missions in life to help people tell their stories.
Yeah.
What are some things that you found, if any, still come up for you? Maybe it's an internal belief about yourself, or maybe it's exposure to something that might trigger a memory. Is there anything that you're still working through that comes up?
There's a lot that triggers me today. A lot of, I find stuff around sex used to be incredibly triggering. I struggle sometimes with my mental health. And when I say struggle, I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I'm just thinking about how I can answer that question. For me, it's really been about integrating my experiences and my pain and my trauma into how I look after myself today. So it's about going, these things are real for me and they're not going to change. These are feelings that I have, these triggers that I have. They'll get less with time, but they're a part of who I am. My story is a part of who I am. And just looking at myself with absolute deep love and acceptance in spite of every single thing that I've been through, and then every single challenge that I experience as a result of that. And to just go to myself, you are loved and held by you first and foremost, even when the world doesn't hold you, even when your parents didn't make you feel safe, even when the family you grew up in was abusive, even when you were completely oppressed and you had no opportunities in front of you, you are still loved and completely accepted. And I believe that I've been able to really nurture that in myself and provide myself safety and protection in my life today. That holds me and helps me to deal with everything that has happened to me, that has happened in my life. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. And I feel very similarly. For me, the word that would encapsulate that would be worthiness. Because growing up in Mormonism, we had to constantly ask if we were worthy from the bishop. I did this thing. Am I worthy of taking the sacrament? I did this thing. Am I worthy of saying a prayer in church? And constantly having this cycle of repentance. And so that's been the one thing for me that has carried as this inner voice that I find myself catching of course you're worthy. Of course you're worthy. And just constantly rewiring that in my brain, because it's so difficult when you're a child, 0 to 7, your brain is wired based on the environment. It's wired based on how your caregivers speak to you and those around you speak to you. So you really have to consciously deprogram that in order for your outlook to change, for your perspectives to change. Otherwise, you may have left the cult, but you are still thinking with that same mentality that's holding you back and not allowing you to be the person who you were meant to be and who you want to be. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that question of what it was that has helped you, if there's been any triggers. And what you're doing today is so amazing and helping other people tell their stories and own their stories and face their stories even too. Is there anything else you want to share about that part of your journey? And then we'll talk about what brings you joy and peace.
Yeah. I mean, because I work in personal branding today, it's happened as just this result of me going on a complete identity journey with myself and understanding, like you say, my worthiness. And I was just talking about this on a call like the other day, where it's like, I truly believe that, say, money is a reflection of my internal beliefs about my own worthiness. And when you grow up in an environment like Gloriavale and you're literally taught the fundamental basis of the religion is that you are a sinner and you are born unworthy and you need the blood of Christ to make you worthy, you're conditioned into this way of thinking that you aren't good enough. And that's been one of my, probably the biggest thing for me has been to go, well, I'm going to drown this out completely with this belief that I am absolutely 100% worthy. and also surrounding myself with just people who affirm that to me and who believe that for me as well. And I think that's why I love the storytelling and the personal branding too, because of the healing aspect of it. So I love working with people to heal their stories and find their stories and then write and share their stories, but then to also make a decent living of their stories too. So for someone who had no money and left with nothing but the clothes on her back from Gloriavale, to having run my first 7-figure business at 23 and now working with 8-figure clients, like that all feels so empowering to me, because I've been able to show myself that this person or this way of living in Gloriavale isn't the only option for myself, and that I do have skill and I do have power and I am worthy and I can build this for myself. And that's why I love helping people with their stories and their personal branding, because it's not just the money, it's the inner power, it's the ability for you to grow yourself as a person, but to heal everything that's going on for you as well. As you can see, I'm like crazy passionate about this. But yeah, it's amazing. I can't believe that I get to do this today.
Yeah, and so amazing too that you have continued to be that beacon of light and hope for those who may be still in, going, can I actually survive if I leave? Do I actually have options? Am I going to perish in hellfire like they told me? Or
Yeah.
there's Lilia out there and look how she's thriving and look how she's owned her story. And so it's great that you've been willing to be in that spotlight so publicly, not only for people who are still in Gloriavale wanting to leave potentially, but like you said, people from all over the world who can relate. I mean, I feel like people who
Totally.
watch our channel, even if it's a family cult or a narcissistic parent, people are going, oh yeah, this sounds just like my childhood, but different setting. And it's just so helpful to see how people have broken out of these high control situations and manipulations and found their voice and been successful, because that's really what people need, is the hope and the ability to hope that they can do something similar.
Yeah, totally. And then if we see someone who has been through a situation so similar to ours and who has made something of their life, like I just know that I am going to get messages from people who've watched this podcast. They're going to write to me and say, hey, I heard your story on Cults to Consciousness. And that's like just amazing to me that I can sit here and literally just talk about my story, which is just my normal, and that it makes such a difference in the world. And the world needs our stories, because this is how we heal. We heal in connection with each other. We heal in community.
Yeah.
We don't heal in isolation. And that's one of the big problems with Gloriavale. They are so isolated, and, you know, that's what we're trying to change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So let's talk about then, aside from your business, what is it that brings you joy and peace, happiness, all the things?
Oh, my family. I just love them. They're hectic. Don't get me wrong. There's
What does
so
that
many
mean?
of them too. There's just a lot of them.
Oh.
Like, so, because there's 10 of us and we all still live in Christchurch. And they've all got kids too. The younger ones don't obviously have kids yet, but a lot of them are married and lots of kids. So when I say hectic, I'm talking like Christmas Day is probably going to be like about 40 to 50 people, just my sort of immediate family with their kids. So it's crazy. I love it, and kind of hate it a little bit too when I need my space, but I love it. And I love that, like, you know, my family's journey has been really rough. It's taken a long time for us to heal. A lot of them didn't want me to tell my story and write my book. And, you know, I just had to say, this is what I'm doing for myself. This is what I believe is right. But we've kind of come to this place now where everyone's matured enough and we're far enough away from the pain of Gloriavale and the challenge of that we're able to have relationships. And they're not easy. Like, family dynamics and relationships are never easy. But I'm just so grateful of the fact that I don't have to be separated from my family, which I was for 8 years. I didn't see my older siblings. So now today I'm just like, oh, this is the best thing. So I just love them coming over, dropping their kids over to be looked after. They make a mess of the house though, and they're always eating my entire fridge, but I love it. I love providing for them and nurturing them, and just really family is my absolute joy other than my business and my creativity and doing that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we didn't even get to, and maybe if you're open to doing a live with us, I would love to talk about ways that you've been able to reclaim your Indigenous roots that were stripped away from you.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't talk about that because, in Gloriavale, you're supposed to just be a template basically, and then they fill that template up with what they want. But yeah, for me, I'd love to do a live with you. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Great. We'll figure out a time after we finish this up.
Yeah.
But let's end with our Linda Listen moment.
Linda, listen, you are capable of so much more than you currently believe right now, and you are absolutely 100% worthy.
Beautiful. I love it. That's perfect. Tell everybody where they can find you, social media, how they can support you, all the things.
Yeah, great. So my podcast is Brandbreaker on Spotify currently, going to get it on Apple, but you can find me on all socials, basically TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. It's Lilia Tarawa, first name, last name, Liliatarawa. And if you want to read my memoir, it's Daughter of Gloriavale, My Life in a Religious Cult. And you can just Google that and it will pop up online.
Perfect. This has been so great talking with you, Lilia. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
No, I loved chatting with you. It's super easy. I feel like we went deep into the story, which is great. It's been a while since I've really shared this much story on a platform. So thank you so much for creating the space for me to bring my story here and share it with your audience. It means the world to me.
Yes, of course. It's an honor. As I mentioned before, we've been in contact for about a year and you were taking a break. So I do feel really special that you chose to come on and do another deep dive after taking a break. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that live as well.
Awesome. Me too.
Okay, guys, if you're listening, thank you so much for making it to the end. Let us know if you did. Leave those words of encouragement down below for Lilia. It means so much to us, to our guests. It boosts the algorithm. It sends it to people who are not subscribed. If you're not subscribed already, please do so. It also helps our show and helps us do this as our full-time job. If you want to support even further, we have channel memberships where you can have specific perks like early video access or special live streams depending on the tier. And if that's not your thing and you want to do Patreon, you could do that too. Patreon.com/cults2consciousness. We have some merch at cults2consciousness.com. And if you like this video, I will link 2 more down here below. Maybe check out our Amish playlist or our 12 tribes playlist. And from the moment of this recording and when you're watching this, I will have been trying to get more people on from Gloriavale to continue the story and share more of those perspectives. So thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.